when we hit those lows, what if instead of trying to get the hell out of there, what if what I recognize is like, there's more to me than I thought there was? What if these things are actually part of my wholeness? What if that's part of what makes me beautiful, actually? What if that's actually an aspect of who I am that is a good part of who I am, and that if I consent to the work of God in my life, I get to call these things good and then change my posture towards myself.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for practical resources for recovery from and safeguarding against spiritual abuse, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Brian Lee. I'm an ordained pastor and spiritual abuse survivor, and I know what it feels like navigating life after spiritual abuse. I also know what it's like to want to prevent anything from happening to the people you know and love. It's why Broken to Beloved exists. And we need your help. We're looking for just 80 people to join us by setting up a donation for $10 a month. You can head to brokentobeloved.org/support or click the link to donate in the show notes. Today, we're talking with Justin McRoberts. He spoke at one of our previous summits about his book, Sacred Strides, and I loved that conversation, and I hope you'll enjoy this one too. Justin is the author of 8 books, including his newest, In the Low, which he co-authored with Scott Erickson. And now, here's my conversation with our friend, Justin. Justin, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here, man. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. Let's start with some, technical is the wrong word, but is it safe to say that you are generally a writer and Scott is generally an artist? Because you are extremely creative.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I would say so. Yeah, I think that is safe, and it's because it's safe to be wrong. I think
good.
It's, I'll start with Scott, and I'll tell you an anecdote that Scott will love that I'm telling in his absence.
Yay!
Is we were at a conference in Pittsburgh, the conference we met at, it's Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a conference called Jubilee. And there was a speaker. There was someone who was speaking on the main stage that afternoon or the evening. Scott had run into like 6 or 7 times, and we were talking about like speakers and celebrities and all this kind of stuff. And Scott said, it doesn't irritate me, but it's a little bit embarrassing. He's like, this guy like reintroduces himself to me like every time. Like he doesn't remember having met me before. I was like, oh, that's so. As we're having that conversation, that guy walks onto the elevator. The guy we're talking about, and he sees me, and I've known the guy for a long time in different contexts. And I'm like, hey, it's good to see you. He's like, we're trying time back and forth, how the kids, etc. And then goes to Scott. He goes, hey, and introduces himself. And he goes, oh, yeah, you paint. That's what he says. And then, like, 2 hours later, got off the elevator, walked off, and we were just like, that was perfect. It was a skit. But from then, like, Scott and I have this back and forth conversation. It's actually part of Scott's life. It's like, his handle is Scott the Painter. Mm-hmm. And at this point, it's kind of a misnomer. I would suggest that if Scott falls into a category, I would say he's more of a performance artist.
I love that.
Because and this is me, and Scott would probably say something otherwise. He's a world-class artist. Scott's capacity for visual art and the particular kinds of visual art he makes, he really does things differently than anyone I know, and he does them at like a really, really high level. He's very good at that. Yeah. I would say that the thing he's best at, though, is the synthesis of visual art, communication, humor, and reflection.
Yeah.
So I would call him more of a performance artist. I would say
love that.
I do some writing, but if I look at my calendar and the way I spend my time, I spend most of my time in more of like a coaching retreat leading posture. So I'm a communicator facilitator. And I also write. So that's the complex. There's the complex menagerie of answer to your question.
Well, and it was all in service of a follow-up question that I really want to ask, which is this. I love that the book just lists both of your names, that it's not so simple as written by Justin with artwork by Scott. Would you tell us about that choice
Yeah.
how much of your writing is informed by Scott and how much Scott's artwork is informed by your writing, and how that worked.
Yeah, at this point, there's a lot of, this is our third
Mm-hmm.
book together, and we've done quite a bit outside of those books as well in terms of live shows or performances. And there's a lot of what we do together that has, I'll use the word synthesis again, that has this sort of synesthetic like back and forth. There's a lot of energy back and forth between like my writing and his visual pieces, then his visual pieces and what I'm writing, and then some what he writes. Even to the degree that when we were starting to put the book together, the way we both tend to write is like, I don't think I've ever like sat down and said like, I'm going to write a book about rest, or I'm going to write a book about creativity. I will look up and see like over the course of the last 10 months, I've collected these thoughts, these notes.
Right.
And so I'm clearly thinking about these things, and then I start to assemble and build. At the point at which these things started to pop up after, honestly, almost 8 years of conversation about like a project like this, there was so much resonance already between like, this is a piece that very clearly works really well with what Scott's doing. And Scott was putting these pieces together that like, this very clearly like has correlation with the stuff that Justin's doing. So there's the kind of a natural like cultural spiritual connection between what we do. This book more so than the ones in the past to some degree because we're more practiced at it, but also because this is just a deeper place for both Scott and I to talk about depression and like sadness and disillusionment. So there's a truckload of that. And then once we actually get into the practice and process of assembling the thing, I would say probably like a third of what ended up like written or drawn was really, really informed by what we already had on hand. In other words, like showed up with most of it. And then the rest of it was relatively easy because like that energy was kind of bubbling, a little bit volcanic. Like this is already happening. And about a third of the book sort of emerged and erupted from like the energy and the collision of what was already happening. So a lot of it is that way.
Yeah. I love that. Well, I always appreciate trying to credit the right people.
Yeah.
I think especially with a book like this, and knowing like Scott also writes, he has Say Yes, he has Honest Advent. So in reading through the poems and the prayers and the pieces and looking at the artwork and assuming that you had some input on that and he has some input on the writing, just to know that like, I don't want people to walk away and assume that you just did the writing and he just did the artwork, but that it really is a collaboration. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. You open up the book with a sort of new mantra, right? This is your third book. So you add to this, to the other two books, we spend time in the low because we are human, not because we're broken.
Yes.
And I love that because personally, and from so many people that we've heard from in our community, that there's this idea that lowness comes out of our brokenness. So tell us more about that.
And specifically for your community of people, identifying depression, lowness, sadness, anger, like all the negative emotions, identifying those as problems, internal problems for me to internally deal with so that I can get back to like my life is like such a terrible narrative that like if I'm experiencing disillusion, if I'm constantly experiencing anger, well, like those are issues that I have, my anger, my disillusion, my sadness. And I need to either medicate those or figure out what's going on in me. What that does, it does two things they're awful. The first one is it forgoes the cultural diagnostic moment, which is to say, like, if we are collectively experiencing a depression, if there's so many of us, you have a community of folks, we're experiencing a lot of these same things. What are the chances we're experiencing the same thing because we're having the same internal experience because we're having a cultural moment, we're sharing a cultural moment. So what does that say about the systems that we belong to? That's not to say I push everything out onto the systems, because how I respond is on me. But I think a more mature posture, what we recognize is my not being well might be evidence that the culture I belong to, the systems I am functioning in, are also not well. I want to follow the thread. So instead of just concluding depression is a problem and I need to deal with it, where does that take you? like follow the thread of your depression. Where is this coming from? Does everything have a cause? Maybe, maybe not. But if I follow the thread, there are probably some practices and protocols in me that I need to deal with. But I'm also probably dependent upon or attached to social, cultural patterns, institutional patterns that are jerking with my mind, and I need to diagnose those as well. So I'd love to come back to that some. The other piece is, I was just having this conversation. We tend to conflate health and wholeness, and I don't think they're the same thing. So when we talk about health, so we talk about like people's mental health journey or spiritual health. Oftentimes when we talk about health, it's hard, and I don't think this is a problem. It's hard not to, like, you say men's health, and like they say health, and you think about magazines like Men's Health, or like, and it's like this is a picture of what health is. And health, when we talk about health, it has a lot to do with the absence of negative emotions, the absence of negative patterns. Like being physically healthy is the absence of fat. Like it's the absence of these negative things. Now, is it a good idea to eliminate certain things from your diet and all that kind of stuff and move towards health? That's fine. I would suggest that wholeness is a deeper journey. And health is fine. Health is a good thing to pursue, but wholeness means that I actually embrace the aspects of me that like aren't going to get healthy in a healthy way. This is a part of me that will never go away. For those of us who live with depression, if I'm constantly pressing myself up against the wall of health, then I'm adding to my depressive journey the shame that comes from like, well, I'm incomplete and I'm broken.
Yep.
And what I want to do with the book is to say like, well, should you address some of the factors, practices, and elements in your life that lead to this cycle of returning to the low? Probably. But please don't go down the path of thinking that at some point you will eliminate this aspect of who you are. Because that's not the human journey. Health is one thing, and it's a good thing. Wholeness, I would suggest, is actually the stage on which all of it happens. That if I don't embrace myself as a whole person, then my health journey will be riddled with shame.
Yep. I think that's it. And there's so much of that theme throughout the book, this embracing of the low with all of the other pieces, that the low isn't something to get over. It's not something to just push through. That I think there's even one poem, it's like the low is part of who I am.
Yes.
And so embracing all of that towards wholeness and integration rather than just like the shunning or dismissing or, pressing down and all of these things. So I love that whole idea. You also invite us through Mary Mrozowski's welcoming prayer into an embodied approach to this work in a book which we largely consume like with our eyes, with our thinking. So I love this embodied approach that you talk about this need to notice our sensations and experiences, and it's so much a part of what I'm learning in terms of that work of wholeness, to take that embodied approach to it. And there's a phrase you include in there. You say, welcoming experience as an opportunity to consent to God's presence. That's a phrase that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. Consent to God's presence. Say more about that.
The consent piece really specifically is a hallmark of I would suggest the good spiritual formative practice. That it's a prayer and spiritual formation have far less to do with me accomplishing something with a tool and like getting something done, and more to do with allowing myself to be cared for, allowing myself to like allowing the divine to be the divine in my life, and to actually consent to the activity of God. So what Mary Mrozowski does with the prayer is actually moves us towards like the actual practice of consenting to what's happening in us, consenting what's happening between us and God, as opposed to the constant kind of Western driven practice of trying to make something happen, like adding stress upon stress. I'm experiencing this, and if I'm experiencing this, then I have to do something to deal with this. And what Mrozowski says, and I love, is like, why don't you, instead of doing that, why don't you consent to what's happening in your body already? And if I can consent to what's happening in my body already, then it allows me to consent to what God is actually up to in me, as opposed to trying to get God to do something that God's not already doing. Consent, I would suggest, is maybe actually the spiritual pivot point for mature adults. Because what we don't get is that we are constantly being acted upon without our consent anyways, right? Like I'm not consenting necessarily. I'm not consciously consenting to all of the aspects of my culture that are actually acting on me and forming me. If I can begin to consciously consent to the activity of God that awakens me to the permissions I have been giving other entities, other agencies, and other powers in my life that have been forming me, I would suggest consent is the pivot point for like a healthy spiritual mental practice, because I recognize how much of my life there is in which I'm giving myself over to powers that are acting on me that I didn't give them permission to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think consent, it's funny because I hear it a different way, or I read it a different way than the way I hear you explaining it now. And I think for so many people who have experienced some kind of abuse or trauma, that agency is taken away from them. So this idea that we can consent to these things or consent to the presence of God, which we're so often taught is just everywhere, and that we don't have the agency to consent to that presence being there. And yet there's this invitational surrender to it rather than this forced surrender of force, like I just have to deal with it because it's always there, versus the invitation to become aware of what's already there.
Yeah.
I think that helps so much.
I agreed. And even that, I agree, like the I think the attempt at kindness in communicating that God is everywhere at all times. I understand that. But what you're pointing out is that if God is good and kind, then God doesn't act without consent. In other words, this moment in which you have Jesus saying that there was, how is it phrased? I should probably pull up the scripture itself. That there are places in the scriptures where Jesus won't he won't work in a certain region, and he's like, we're not working there. Like he relents. He decides not to work there. And the way we tend to teach that is like, well, there wasn't enough faith in that place, and so Jesus didn't act on the faith. That's a way to talk about it. The other side of the coin is part of the act of faith in me is consent. I will allow you to come and do this work of healing. Even watch it in the healings, Jesus will say, extend your hand. So instead of just saying your hand is in your cloak, I'm going to go ahead and heal it from here inside your cleats, extend your hand. That puts this gentleman in a position in which like he can, or he doesn't have to. He can extend his hand or not. Go wash in the pool of Siloam. If you want the healing, then you get to participate in this healing. I think that's part of the character and the kindness of God. Is God present constantly? Yes. Is God constantly acting on and around and with you? I don't know. I wonder if part of what we learn with regards to what it means to have faith is actually granting God permission to move and act in areas of our life, specifically more delicate ones.
Yeah. I find that fascinating. And I also love that you say that at no point are you asking us to welcome hurtful circumstances, abuses, acts of violence, but instead to just welcome God's presence and to and with us in those experiences, to the ways our soul respond. You've already said that this is kind of the act of spiritual formation. Isn't this also the nature of spiritual direction? Is that invitation?
100%. So, and both Scott and I became spiritual directors, got certifications in spiritual direction between the last book and this one. And that's informed the way we shaped this as well. And the delineation between, consenting to or welcoming negative circumstances versus welcoming how I feel about that negative circumstance is a really, really healthy spiritual and mental health practice. Is like, I don't need to welcome and embrace what happened. I really do want to be okay with how I feel about it, though, and I don't want to conflate the two. I don't want to say this thing is this thing. How I feel about it is the thing. The thing is how I feel about it. What Mary Morzowski's prayer does is it actually puts me in a position to say, like, these are my responses to the data around me, negative and positive. This is what I'm experiencing, and I get to embrace what's happening in me without making a judgment about my circumstances. I don't have to attach the two. I can just deal with what's going on in me, which I think is freedom.
Yeah, I totally agree. I felt the temptation as I was reading through the book, knowing that prayer was going to come at the end of each section, to just like skim through it or skip it. I was like, I got more to get to. And I also felt the need or the invitation, I guess, to just slow down and just read it anyway, because it's not that long. But it was such a welcome invitation to be like, hey, let's just check in. This was a whole section on these things. And it really was just such a beautiful way to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you did that.
Me too. And I feel that invitation. There's a poem, Prayer on 52. And you say, one thing I do know is that the heaviness makes thinkers of us all. Grant me the courage to get out of my head and not think my way out of healing and wholeness. And there's that beautiful artwork of Rodin's thinker in a vice. So, this invitation to embodiment, like if the way to healing and wholeness isn't through thinking, where is it through?
So that's the consent piece. So here we come into the conversation about like systems of control versus the activity of the divine. And healing and how we identify healing, most of our definitions for healing or health, they come from like systems that have a really particular goal in mind. And those aren't bad things. I would just say they're probably lesser things. So if I'm going to be healthy spiritually, emotionally, that means I have a vision for that, or the system that taught me that has a vision for what that looks like and how I get to that. So I want to try to get to this place. That effort is fine. I want to hold that effort loosely because I would suggest that God's perspective on what healing and what wholeness look like are grander, deeper, more complex. We use the word mystery far too often, but a tad more mysterious. Do I want to hit my health goals spiritually, emotionally, physically? Like, sure. But at some point in there as well, like I would like to be whole in a way that I'm designed to be whole, and not just in the ways I'm trying to be whole, which means consenting. Like, what do you want for me? So we go to Paul's, like often misused bit about like, there's this thorn in my flesh, and I asked God to take it, and He said no. and then He said, and then we go really quickly to. And I think they're clearly attached. We would go quickly to like my power is made perfect in your weakness. That's all cute when we move that to like, well, Paul had to be humbled so that he could do this thing. But before the work of Paul's life, that even that notion of like, there's this thing that I really want God to remove from my life, this thorn in my flesh, this thing in my body, this thing happened to me that I really want you to take away. And that God says, no, I'm not going to. Just that little bit of conversation. What is the divine perspective on human wholeness? Like, what is God's take on me? Like, what does God mean? What does God desire for me when it comes to like my wholeness? And as someone who has lived with ADHD and depression the entire time, and these things aren't going away. I will live with ADHD and depression the entirety of my life. It's never gone away. So if these things aren't going away, what if me living with this thing that my culture calls a dysfunction?
Yep.
What if me living with this pattern of lowness that my culture calls depression and a problem? What if these things are actually part of my wholeness? What if that's part of what makes me beautiful? Actually, what if that's actually an aspect of who I am that is a good part of who I am, and that if I consent to the work of God in my life, I get to call these things good and then change my posture towards myself.
Yep. Because without that, we wouldn't have gotten in the low.
Yes. True story.
Because your experience would have been completely different. And then we don't get people who need that message of how to live with this thing, not in spite of, not around, not ignoring, but just like, how do I integrate this anxiety and depression into me as part of me and say, this is how we live. This is what wholeness looks like.
It removes, hopefully it can remove the shame piece of it, that like, I should not be this way.
Yeah.
Okay. How about we stop that piece for a minute and just say, this is how I am. This is an aspect of who I am. And let's just begin there. as opposed to begin from, and there's a poem in here about this, like sort of like ghost of an image of like who I'm supposed to be. I'm supposed to live this way. That's not a real thing. This perception of who I'm supposed to be, like, that's not real. What's real is what's actually happening in me, which takes me back to Mary Mrzowski's prayer, like embrace and pay attention to what's actually real, what's actually paying attention. Let's just begin there and stay there long enough that I can see what's good about this, as opposed to constantly chasing this ghost of health.
Yeah, I love all of that. You're right about how our relationships and connections are so intertwined when it comes to our perception and experience of connections, both to God and people, right? And you even say, I think when those people were gone from my life, it was less of a social bummer and more of a full-blown existential crisis. I am now radically aware of the way my God connection is tied to my people connection. So when those connections feel severed or lost, how did you find a way back toward safety and vulnerability and even consent in making new connections?
Yeah, well, I didn't for a long time. Part of the chapter, but I think will resonate with a number of people who, in the broken and beloved world, is, as I'd been a pastor for going on 20 years at the time, and I had tied my identity to the work, tied my identity to being a pastor, and which really, it's one thing to say that like that. I tied my identity to the work and to the role. What I actually mean by that, I think, is that I tied my identity to a specific set of results that it's supposed to turn out this way. And I don't think I knew that I'd done that at the time. It would have been easy for me to say, like, well, I'd attach myself to the name pastor, to the role pastor. What I didn't know I meant by that was that by attaching myself to the role pastor, I was attaching myself to a certain set of expectations that this is how this is going to turn out.
Yeah.
And when those things went away is when the bottom fell out, and I hit that low. And for a long time, man, like I didn't climb out. I didn't reconnect. I stayed, and I didn't choose to. I'm glad that I did. One of the prayers in the book, kind of close to the center of the book, is, my hope is not just that I ascend back to the surface, though I do hope that. My hope is that I learn to breathe at this depth.
Yeah.
I didn't, had I chased reconnection immediately, which is like, that's the impulse, is like, I've hit a low, I feel isolated, I feel alone. I need to get the hell out of here. I need to find some new friends. I need to move towns. I need to find a better job. Like, immediately jumping to, I've got to get out for all kinds of reasons. And none of which had to do with like my will or wisdom. I was dumb as a brick at the time. I was just there for a long time. And I would even say like this, I stayed long enough to figure out that deeper part of me, the deep, dark feeling of isolation, I didn't get there. Like, it didn't happen. I didn't like come to that knowledge, like, after that sense of isolation didn't show up after things had fallen apart. That place, that depth in me was already there. And the floor I fell through was kind of a false floor anyways. Those relationships as a pastor, I think we had this conversation a long time ago, that I was told by the guy who was training me. He said, once you tighten on this role as a pastor, like, you don't get to just be another person in the room. Like, your friendships change forever, and like, they won't treat you the same. And I didn't believe that. And so I had all these kind of like false expectations of what this community would be for me. And then the floor fell out. Well, that isolation, that loneliness, that was there already in me. And my time in the low, the deepest low of my life after losing the church, what I discovered was like, this is actually part of who I am. This sense, like, I have felt isolated and alone. And there are a lot of places in my life in which I'm just going to feel isolated and alone. This is an aspect of life. Yeah. I'm not going to have as many friends as I thought I was going to have. And I'm not going to be able to go as deep with as many people as I thought I was going to go deep with. So I didn't get reconnected initially. It took a long time to become familiar with, and I didn't even know if I want to use the word comfortable with. To consent to, this is an aspect of who I am. This darkness, this depression, this sense of isolation. So again, one of the poems in the book, like I never got out. I never climbed myself back out. I didn't reconnect in a way that got me back out of the low. What I did is like, well, okay, if this is an aspect to it, I connect differently now.
Yeah.
My relationships are different. My relationship with the institutional church is different. My relationship with myself is different. I learned that there's more to me. And this is the last piece I'll say about this is when we hit those lows, what if instead of trying to get the hell out of there, what if what I recognize is like, there's more to me than I thought there was. And this is part of what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. There's a set of prayers back to back on 70 and 72 about grief rescuing us from this illusion that everyone wants the best for us, followed by the idea of how disillusionment clears the path of false hope so that we can experience the fullness of pain that comes with a good life. My goodness.
Yeah, man.
I imagine some people hear this and liken it to their own experiences of whatever, deconstructing, deconverting, cynicism, the loss of these connections and relationships. And yet what I hear in these prayers is hope.
Yeah.
What does receiving that gift of disillusionment or about grief rescuing us from that illusion look like without the soul-crushing weight that I think people often feel or hear? Because I think there is that hope in receiving disillusionment.
Yes. That's a good question. I can tell you what I discovered, which is that it ended up being a choice between, so you're talking about soul-crushing weight. It has ended up oftentimes being a choice between two different kinds of weight and burden, which is part, I love the teaching of Jesus in which he says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. What he doesn't say is like, there's no yoke or there's no burden. That there's a path in life in which there's no yoke, and there's a path in life in which there's no burden. No, there's a yoke and there's a burden. So the prayer on 70, I've come to realize that not everyone wants me whole, knowing that comes with some grief. I do have to grieve. Like, this is how I thought it was going to go. This is how I wanted it to go. And I have to let go of that. And yet that grief rescues me from the illusion that everyone is for me and has my best interests in mind. May grief over the ways I thought I was cared for, clear room in me for thankfulness to shine on the ways I am. I have come to believe my soul has far more wisdom and knowledge than I give it credit for, than I give myself credit for. We figured this out after a time, and we figured it out after we hit the wall. And I think we figured this out in the low. We come to know this in the low. It's my soul. And we say this after the breakup, right? Like, something in me knew, this thing happened. I just kept having this feeling, and she would do these things, and I wasn't sure about it. And then we were like, oh wow, I kind of knew. I sort of knew that. We call it instinct. I think our souls are experiencing life at a depth and a degree that we don't give our souls credit for, and we don't live our lives oftentimes at a pace slow enough to pay attention to what's happening in our soul. And in the grief of letting go of how I thought things were, I actually get to pay attention to my soul, say like I kind of knew this was going to fall apart. But also in the same way that I knew this was falling apart, I want us to pay attention to this. Like, these are the friends that you thought you were going to have. These are the people who are actually caring for you. So maybe deeper than anything else, I think our souls, the depth of our souls are the places where God is doing this work that's sort of secret from our conscious mind and is divorced from our calendars. And on the other side of the grief of losing what we thought we had or what we thought we wanted, we get to discover what our souls are wanting and what our souls are experiencing.
Yeah. I think that's so good. And, and we've talked about this one already several times, but just that question of how did you get out? And it's like, well, I didn't get out. It's just the lowest part of who I am. Yeah. I so appreciate the idea that being in the low is not just a season to endure or escape or any of these things, but to integrate into part of our wholeness. It's like, and like you're saying, it's like sometimes there's a false floor that we set up for ourselves that when it falls out, we discover that all of this stuff was already there anyway.
Yes. Yeah. This is part of, it's not just who I am now because something happened to me. The thing that happened to me stirred a process in me, which I got to pay attention more deeply to what's actually happening in my gut.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we'll say it several times, tell everyone to get the book, but obviously the whole thing is so good. But
Thank you.
worth the price of admission that people should just buy is the turd sandwich on 96. So we won't say more about it so people go get it for themselves. I love that so
Thank
much.
you.
There's no question. It's just I love it so much.
Yes.
Let's talk about main character energy.
Yes.
Because you write about despising this hyper individualistic narrative that so much of our storytelling trends toward today, right?
Yes.
And you pull us back towards connection and community. That we don't have what it takes to be the main character in our own lives, that we need other people to speak into that and give us essential aspects of our identity. There's so much about our culture that says, just go do it yourself, right? Do you.
Yep.
And yet we discover that the truth is like, we can't.
No.
Tell us about that.
The main character energy piece, I can't remember where I was at the time, and I probably should name it in public, but I was at a conference of some kind, and I think in general it was fine, but there was definitely a motivational type speaker person who was on the stage giving like the kind of the quintessential "you're the main character" talk. And I noticed, and it didn't just happen to me initially. Like I noticed the room not get as stoked as she wanted to be. And you and I both experienced this, where like folks have this sort of collective, like maybe nameless experience of like, again, something in your soul says like, I don't want that. Like, I really don't want that. And I realized, I thought about it afterwards, I reflected and thought like, well, it feels like maybe there was like a burden placed on them. That's what it felt.
That's a good way to say it.
You're the main character.
Yeah.
Like, and then I thought, I left the conference and I started thinking about some of the things I've been saying to coaching clients about like, listen, like you can count on you and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, I mean that well, but I think I'm putting things on I think I'm putting things on people that they're not designed to carry. So the main character, be the main character. I think it works really well as a cute motif, like that sets up great Instagram reels and TikTok.
Right.
Stuff. But I think it's a shit way to live your life.
It sure is.
Outside of the reality that like, if you really are banking on you being the main character and having all your ducks in a row all the time, boy, it's a recipe for like utter disaster, like absolute utter disaster. Also, it's a recipe for feeling entirely isolated. The better way to say it is like, gosh, you're missing out on so much. I was out on a ride with, I'll do this and then I'll get back to the book. It's like, I was on a ride with my 15-year-old a couple days ago on a bike ride. And we went to a place called Rockville, which is not too far from where we live. And I am trash with maps. I was really great. I'm like digital maps. I don't know what happened. I used to have one of those Rand McNally
atlases.
Right? I loved it. Like I traveled the country for years before digital media, and it was like I love the map. I had like all the Barnes and Nobles in the country like marked out on the map because they had Starbucks in them. It was I was like, we know where the coffee's going to be, and I could read those maps. But like digital maps, like I don't know what happens. Like my brain freaks out, and I can't like. So we're out in this trail, and like I know that I'm bad at figuring things out, like figuring out where we are. But he loves it. Like he loves it. He's 15. He loves it, and he's really good at it. And what a deeper experience it was for me. Like I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Like the manly good guy dad thing to do is like I've got it under control. I know where we are on the map. I have a node and a satellite in the sky. So like that's. But like the deeper experience was like, I have no idea where the hell we are right now. Hey buddy, like, how do we get back to, and he like pulls his phone out and like, that was just a deeper experience. That's just a deeper experience of life in which my inabilities, my weaknesses, my shortcomings actually set me up to be in relationship in a way that is way more enjoyable. I get to enjoy him more deeply. And it's not just because it's my son. That's just true of community in general. I pave pathways to deeper connection by way of my absences, my weaknesses, my deficiencies, all these things we have negative terms for. They're just permissions for us to grant other people to have power. and to have like access and give gifts. But the way we came to it in the book was, I'll read a piece of this and then I'll do the rest of it. Is the section is called "Considering the Disconnection from the Natural World and Status and Respect." So south of where I live by just about an hour is Henry Cowell State Park. The park features redwood trees that are upward of 1,600 years old. For some perspective, only 7 nations on Earth are older than these trees. Toward the back of the park is a redwood tree you can climb into and stand fully upright. The tree's roots have grown to provide a doorway, complete with a small staircase leading down into the earth. During a recent visit, as I was waiting my turn to enter the tree, I watched a younger man wearing a very nice business suit smack his head on the tree while climbing out. The crowd gathered around the tree gave a collective ouch while the young man staggered a bit. The park docent reached out to steady him, adding, "You hit your head pretty hard, son." "I'm sorry." This is what the guy says. He goes, "I'm sorry. Did I hurt the tree?" The docent smiled. "Oh, the tree doesn't even know you're here. Are you okay?" And I go on to reflect on like how vital a moment that is, like for someone like that, which is say someone like me, to realize like the tree is 1,600 years old. Literally, the nation you live in didn't exist. The tree did. Like it doesn't care. It doesn't care about you. The ocean that you step in doesn't care about you. When we touch base with nature, this is part of what we do with the book. When we touch base with nature, we actually engage with, and I say this later on in the chapter, we engage with rhythms of wind and tide that have actually that were set in motion like at the moment of creation. And it puts us in a position which like this tiny little speck of a moment in which I'm living, like I'm not the main character. The hell are you talking about? Like you get to live. You get to be here. And the main character narrative steals from us the joy of just being able to exist, that you get to at all.
Yeah.
And if I can embrace that and move away from the main character narrative, then actually I've got a little bit of room to say, like, if I get to live here at all, then maybe I get to be sad. Maybe I get to be disillusioned. Maybe I get to have pain. Maybe I get to have all these things that the main character never wants to push out because the main character is supposed to be the hero. But someone who just is allowed to exist, then if I'm someone who is just allowed to exist, then I've got room for whatever the hell happens while I'm here.
Yeah. Well, and how liberating that must be to allow yourself to be small in a very large story. And to not have to put on airs or overcompensate for areas. Like if you had just tried to make up a reason or a way to read the map and just get yourselves home and just got yourselves in a worse mess, instead of that invitational, beautiful connection that you get to make, whether it's your son or anyone else. I just love that idea. The ability to just be small and get to just live without having to know everything, without having to be in charge, without having to make all the, big decisions and all the things.
It allows life to be.
It does. It does. I love all of it. There's a story that you tell about vaulting at the 2000 Summer Olympics that just struck me. I loved that illustration. And all these gymnasts are not sticking their landings. And then finally someone's like, hey, is the vault maybe at the wrong height? And it was 5 centimeters off, right? It reminds me of similar themes from Monica DiCristina and Erin Moon. Erin starts her book with that dedication to her parents for offering a gospel so real it made all the false versions easier to kill.
So good.
And Monica writes about you learn to spot a counterfeit by spending lots and lots of time with the real thing.
Yes.
And so just this invitation to authenticity and reality and just having the reps in on practicing the real thing over and over again, that as soon as you spot something's off, you just know.
Yes.
And it's something you know in your body.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that we're sharing that moment. It's part of why I find your work valuable is there's so many reasons why your work is valuable. But part of why you what you do is valuable is because when you start collecting these stories of, because if it's one gymnast, who's not sticking her landing, you're like, oh, poor girl's having a bad day. Sucks. It's too bad. But then it's another one. You're like, that's weird. But then like 6 or 7, and it's the point in which there's a community of persons saying like, shit's wrong. Like, this doesn't feel great. Then we begin to diagnose the environment. And that's when magic, I would suggest, culturally starts to happen. I don't know if I'm going to recommend a book that's not mine. Do you have this one yet? In the Absence of the Ordinary?
No, but it's been on my list. I need to move that to the top.
Doggy. Get this bad boy.
I will.
Part of what Weller gets into with the book is that we really are, and I buy this, like we are collectively experiencing like a shared moment of disillusionment. Like things have legitimately changed. It's not just like, I won't say them negatively. We are like, if this many of us are having this similar kind of experience, maybe there is a truth we're telling. In other words, we're kind of painting around the edges of that thing. And part of why what you do is so vital for folks is you actually, the more folks you collect, the more stories you collect, the more stories you highlight of folks giving language to their experience, the more you end up helping to paint that sort of shadow image around like, what is real then? We are all feeling this distance, this frustration that comes from my soul saying there is something better than this. I'm not just disillusioned because like I want something and because I'm selfish. I'm disillusioned because like there is something real here and my soul longs for it. And if I'm dissatisfied here, that's got to mean, this is me, there's got to mean there's something real my soul longs for. My soul longs for. And so what y'all do as a community, what you do as a curator of that community actually gives shape to that in a way that like a singular book or a sermon can't do that. You do that by collecting people who are sharing the same stories and putting those up in a world in which, putting those up in an environment in which people can see that and say, oh shit, me too. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe the equipment's off. And like y'all, the equipment's off.
Yep.
The equipment is off, and it's not off terribly, but it is off just enough. It's enough for us to notice. So thanks for doing what you do and for folding me in on occasion.
I appreciate that so much. I want to close with fear and hope.
Let's do it.
I love this pairing that you do. You know, you say that's one of the tricks that fear plays. It convinces us to trade hope for an angry, controlling version of practicality. It says if you don't kill the thing chasing you, it will kill you. Hope, on the other hand, sees everything fear sees, recognizes those same threats and takes them just as seriously, but does so with the sobriety of history and with peace in her heart. And then you connect hope to vision by saying hope gives birth to vision.
Yes.
Which isn't about knowing the future. It's about actively creating the future regardless of our circumstances and obstacles. And far better than the ability to predict tomorrow's outcomes, it's the willingness and capacity to work towards goodness and beauty with whatever we have on hand. It is so beautiful. It is so invitational. After everything that you have seen and experienced, and Scott as well, who obviously we can't answer for, why or how do you continue to hold on to hope?
I'm designed to.
Yeah.
It's like that. It is the way I'm designed. It's why I'll say it in a very positive way, and then I'll say one negative thing. I'm designed to hope. I'm designed to desire and work for better. It's just what's in me. Mm-hmm. And so I do it because I have to. And I find nothing else, and I find nothing else actually satisfying. It's not satisfying. It's not satisfying. The critique part is fine. The diagnostic is fine, but the hope part, in which I collect whatever I can have, I collect whatever I can on hand, and then do with it whatever I can. Oh, okay, that's soul satisfying. That's the only thing that's ever satisfied. So I continue to come back to hope because it's just the way I'm designed, and it is the reason, and this is the reason why the named and unnamed agencies and elements in our environment work so incredibly hard to keep you mad, and to keep you blaming, to keep you anything other than hoping, keep you distracted, Because when there is change, it's because someone says, okay, I'm exhausted. I don't like what I have on. I don't like what I've experienced, but I'm unsatisfied and I'm going to do something with what I have on hand and for whoever I can do it with. That's when actual change starts. Is you say like, listen, I've got some words, you got some images. Let's throw this thing together. Let's put it in the world, and then let's see what other people do with it when they have it in their lives. That just feels better because that's what I'm designed to do.
Yeah. Thank you. So for people who are feeling caught or stuck in the low and can't seem to find their way back to hope or vision, what would you want to offer them?
One, offer that to some other people. In other words, there aren't a lot of wrong. I don't want to say there aren't a lot of wrong moves per se when it comes to spiritual and mental health practices. But there are things that are far less helpful, and the primary thing that is least helpful is to do it on your own. And by on your own, I mean like you and an Instagram feed. Like, don't like connect with a community of people as best you can. It's why Broken Beloved exists. Get help from a coach, from a therapist, from a spiritual director. Like, part of why you are where you are is because you don't have the capacity or the ability to see everything you're supposed to see, and you can't see yourself the way you want to see yourself. You're not designed to. You need other people to help you do that. And once you've gotten a little bit of help, take a deep breath and like plan on staying where you are for a while. And don't just try to fix it, because it puts you in a position to get addicted to some bullshit someone else is trying to sell you. Follow the threads of your disillusionment. Follow the threads of your sadness. Follow the threads of like the darker experiences you've had or are having, and follow your own soul's guide with the help of other people to what it is your soul is actually desiring.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Justin. If people want to connect with you, if they want to pursue coaching or spiritual direction, where do they find you?
You just search my name, Justin McRoberts. I think I'm like 12th or 15th on the, some crap, who knows? Just my name, Justin McRoberts. I post to Instagram every day. So if you go to Instagram, my stuff's there, but my website is fine and available.
Perfect. And we'll have the links for everyone so they can hit you up. Number one, everyone go get a copy of In the Low, Honest Prayers for Dark Seasons. Justin McRoberts, Scott Erickson. We'll provide the links for everyone in the show notes. Justin, thanks again for being with us.
Anytime, man. Thank you.
What an insightful conversation. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, be sure to follow Justin and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes. Coming up on the show, we have Sarah Billups, Ian Morgan-Cron, Dr. Ariel Schwartz, and more. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. It really helps us to grow and continue providing quality content for you. And a special thank you to our listeners who make this show possible through their financial support. If you consider joining us at $10 a month, consider donating today at brokentobeloved.org/support or at the link in the show notes. This episode was hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Lee. Editing by Heidi Kritz and post-production by Lisa Carnegas. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.